Emirates Flight 407 was scheduled for a routine long flight from Melbourne, Australia to Dubai on a fully loaded Airbus A340. However, what was expected to be a standard flight quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal due to a critical mistake in the cockpit. This error during takeoff endangered the lives of nearly 300 people on board. On the evening of March 20th, 2009, 257 passengers and 18 crew members boarded the flight at Melbourne Airport. Most passengers had arrived from Auckland Airport, New Zealand earlier that day, ready for the 14-hour journey to Dubai. The weather was clear, making it a perfect night for flying. The aircraft, a 5-year-old Airbus A340, was known for its solid safety history and its ability to fly long distances without refueling. The flight had 4 pilots, 2 more than usual, to ensure that the main crew could rest, while the others managed the flight during certain stretches. They were all in the cockpit for the entire flight, including during the pre-flight checks, unaware of the looming crisis as they prepared for takeoff. Inside the cockpit, the captain had more than 8,000 hours of flying experience, including around 1,400 hours on the A340. His first officer had a similar amount of total flying experience, but just over 425 hours on the A340. The relief captain was the most seasoned, boasting nearly 12,500 flight hours. The relief first officer had roughly half of that. Despite the impressive experience levels on paper, it did not translate to safety on this flight. During pre-flight preparations, the cockpit was crowded with 3 pilots and 2 ground engineers, leaving little room. This forced the first relief officer to wait outside until the engineers exited. While the pilots and engineers conversed, the first officer, possibly distracted by the chatter, made a critical mistake. He incorrectly entered the takeoff weight into the electronic flight bag, a device used to calculate takeoff performance parameters. The first officer then passed the electronic flight bag to the captain to verify the settings before they were entered into the aircraft's system. Unfortunately, a crucial verbal check between the captain and the first officer, which could have caught the error, did not occur. The first officer had mistakenly entered the aircraft's weight as 262.5 tons lighter than its actual weight, but this critical error went unnoticed. As computers operate based on the data provided, the system miscalculated the necessary engine power, flap settings, and speed required for takeoff. There were several opportunities to correct this error before the plane took off, but unfortunately, these were missed. At around 10:18 p.m. local time, as the doors of the aircraft closed, so did the last chance to rectify the mistake in the electronic flight bag. Flight 407 left the gate 7 minutes ahead of schedule and made its way to runway 16. By 10:30, the flight was cleared for takeoff by air traffic control. As the aircraft taxied down the runway, the pilots set the flaps to the initial position and increased the thrust to maximum continuous thrust. The plane began to accelerate down the runway, but its speed of acceleration seemed slightly slower than normal, though not alarmingly so at first. However, when the aircraft reached the speed at which it was supposed to lift off the ground, known as rotation speed, the first concerns became apparent. The captain instructed the first officer to rotate the aircraft, a command to lift the nose off the runway. The first officer then pulled back on the side stick to initiate the nose-up action, but the aircraft's nose did not rise as expected. As the situation became dire, the captain urgently called out "rotate" again, prompting the first officer to pull back harder on the controls. While the nose of the aircraft began to rise, the plane itself remained stubbornly on the runway. It was at this moment that both pilots fully realized the severity of their predicament. Despite reaching the rotation speed necessary for takeoff, the plane was about 20 knots too slow for a proper liftoff due to the earlier miscalculation of its weight. With no possibility of safely stopping on the runway, the only option left was to try and get the aircraft airborne. In a critical decision, the captain activated the takeoff and go-around thrust, which provides maximum engine power necessary for either a sudden climb or an aborted landing. As the end of the runway rapidly approached, the situation escalated when the tail of the aircraft struck the runway. The impact caused sparks to fly as the aluminum fuselage scraped against the tarmac at approximately 170 miles per hour, severely damaging parts of the aircraft, including part of the black box and shredding the fuselage. Passengers witnessed a frightening scene. A strange red glow and the smell of burning metal and insulation filled the cabin. With the end of the runway looming, failure to lift off would likely result in a catastrophic crash. Fortunately, just seconds after the captain selected the takeoff or go-around thrust, and about 148 meters beyond the end of the runway, the plane miraculously began to climb, narrowly averting a disaster. This dramatic moment marked a critical turning point as the aircraft finally ascended, ensuring the safety of everyone on board. Although the aircraft had narrowly escaped disaster during takeoff, the crew soon faced a new set of critical challenges. The impact from the tail strike during takeoff had unknowingly damaged some of the Airbus A340's landing systems. As the plane ascended, a warning flashed on the central display indicating a tail strike, which was further confirmed by a radio message from air traffic control. At this point, the crew realized they could not proceed to Dubai and needed to return to Melbourne to assess and address the damage. However, a significant hurdle was the aircraft's heavy weight due to the 130 tons of fuel on board, necessary for the long flight to Dubai. The aircraft needed to be at a maximum landing weight of 280 tons for a safe landing, which meant the crew had to urgently reduce its weight. They received instructions to climb to an altitude of 7,000 feet and began circling over Port Phillip Bay in Victoria, where they started the fuel dumping process to lighten the aircraft. While coordinating these efforts, the first officer used the electronic flight bag again to calculate the exact amount of fuel that needed to be dumped. It was during this critical calculation that he realized the gravity of his initial error in inputting the incorrect takeoff weight. Despite this realization, there was no time to dwell on the mistake. The situation took another tense turn when the relief first officer quickly brought up another serious safety concern that needed immediate attention. The situation for Flight 407 intensified as the crew discovered that the aircraft was not pressurized. The tail strike had been so forceful that it punctured multiple holes in the fuselage, compromising the plane's ability to maintain cabin pressure. Faced with this urgent new problem, the pilots quickly declared a pan-pan to indicate urgency, and air traffic control granted them landing priority over other flights. In the cockpit, the pilots calculated how many circuits around Port Phillip Bay were needed while they dumped fuel to reduce the aircraft's weight to the safe landing threshold of 280 tons. They decided to jettison approximately 80 tons of jet fuel. To ensure accuracy, given the earlier miscalculation, the pilots made 3 separate calculations for the landing performance. 2 using the electronic flight bag and 1 using the aircraft's quick reference handbook. With the aircraft at 7,000 feet above the ocean, a damaged tail, and an increasingly unpressurized cabin, the crew's primary concern was the safety of the 257 passengers and 18 crew members on board. The passengers, understandably worried about their situation, were addressed by the captain. He informed them about the tail strike during takeoff and explained the ongoing fuel dumping process needed for a safe landing. By approximately 11:25, after ensuring enough fuel had been dumped to reach the target landing weight, the pilots prepared for descent back to Melbourne. The focus was clear: to land safely and manage the immediate threats to the aircraft and everyone on board. As Flight 407 began its descent toward Melbourne, the crew was suddenly faced with a new alarming issue: an unusual rumbling noise, followed by reports of smoke indicating a possible fire on board. The first officer quickly contacted the control tower to relay this urgent development, prompting an earlier-than-planned landing. In response, the tower dispatched fire and rescue services to the runway, preparing for any eventuality as the aircraft approached. The urgency to land was critical, intensifying the challenge for the crew, who now had to execute a faster-than-usual landing. This increased the risk of overrunning the runway once more, putting immense pressure on the captain. Upon touchdown, the captain immediately applied heavy braking and engaged the reverse thrust to rapidly decelerate the aircraft. This tense moment held everyone's breath as the plane hurtled toward the end of the runway. Miraculously, the aircraft managed to come to a stop just shy of the runway's end, avoiding another potential disaster. The whole ordeal from takeoff to touchdown lasted only an hour and 4 minutes, but for those on board, it likely felt much longer. Thanks to the skill and quick actions of the flight crew, Emirates Flight 407 landed safely on runway 34, ensuring the safety of all passengers and crew despite the harrowing circumstances they encountered. After the harrowing landing of Emirates Flight 407, emergency response teams swiftly confirmed that there was no fire on board, and fortunately, no one was injured. The post-incident inspection of the aircraft revealed significant damage to the underside of its rear fuselage. The intense contact with the runway during the tail strike had completely stripped off the lower skin panels of the aircraft's external sheets. Additionally, a service panel was dislodged, and many fuselage frames and stringers in the rear section were damaged due to abrasion and the forces during the strike. An investigation carried out by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau and other aviation safety organizations identified two primary causes for the incident. The first was the flight crew's oversight in failing to detect the incorrect takeoff weight that had been input into the system. The second was the late realization of the compromised takeoff performance. The investigation also uncovered that the flight crew had not completed all the tasks outlined in the standard operating procedures, which further contributed to the failure in detecting the initial error. This series of missteps led to the perilous situation that endangered the safety of everyone aboard. The events surrounding Emirates Flight 407 underscore a complex scenario where a series of human errors nearly led to a catastrophic disaster. The first officer's modification of the flex takeoff weight on the master flight plan during the load sheet confirmation inadvertently masked the error further, depriving the crew of another critical chance to catch the miscalculation before takeoff. In response to the incident, Emirates took decisive action by terminating the involved pilots, reflecting the seriousness with which they treated the breach in procedural adherence. The airline also overhauled its pre-flight procedures, notably implementing the use of dual laptops for flight planning to ensure cross-verification of data, which aims to prevent single points of failure in data entry. Furthermore, Emirates began developing an avionics system specifically designed to monitor and alert crews about takeoff acceleration, enhancing the ability to detect anomalies early in the takeoff process. Airbus also responded by updating its software to better identify incorrect data inputs, planning further developments in monitoring systems that alert pilots to discrepancies in necessary parameters. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau issued safety recommendations not only to the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration and the International Air Transport Association, but also broadly across the aviation industry, aiming to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents in the future. The A340 aircraft involved was repaired and continued to serve with Emirates until 2014, illustrating the resilience and robustness of modern aviation practices when correctly followed. This incident serves as a potent reminder of the critical importance of rigorous pre-flight checks and the correct calculation of takeoff parameters. The ongoing adjustments and improvements in aviation safety protocols following such incidents contribute significantly to the overall safety and reliability of air travel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and until next time.